They laughed at her. Not a gentle laugh. Not the kind that forgives ignorance. This was the kind of laughter that echoes in marble halls, the laughter of people who believe power makes them untouchable. The judge sat before them. Once feared. Once respected. Now paralyzed from the neck down, trapped in a body that no longer listened to him. Doctors had tried. Surgeons had failed. Prayers had gone unanswered. Then a barefoot girl stepped forward. Her dress was torn. Her voice was steady. She looked at the judge and said, "Free my mother, and I will heal you." The courtroom erupted. But by sunset that day, the same people who laughed would be on their knees, whispering one question: how is this possible? This is a story about truth, justice, and the moment when the powerful finally meet the consequences of their choices. Stay close. Because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about miracles, justice, and the power of a single voice in a world that's forgotten how to listen. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This story needs to be heard. And if it touches your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that truth still matters. Her name was Amara. She was 13 years old, but life had aged her far beyond her years. She lived in a one-room shack at the edge of town, where the road stopped being paved and hope came in short supply. The walls were thin. The roof leaked when it rained. The floor was bare concrete, cold in winter, hot in summer. But it was home. It was all they had. And for Amara, it was enough. Because home wasn't about the walls. It was about the woman who lived inside them. Her mother, Grace. Grace had taught her 3 things: speak only when your words matter. Never hate, even when the world hates you. Truth survives longer than power. These weren't just words. They were a way of life. A code that Grace lived by every single day. And Amara watched. She learned. She absorbed every lesson, every moment, every quiet act of dignity that her mother performed in a world that offered her none in return. Grace worked as a cleaner in the courthouse. She swept the floors. Emptied the trash. Heard every secret. It was honest work, invisible work. The kind of work that makes you a ghost in the eyes of those who matter. But Grace didn't mind. She believed in dignity, even when the world offered none in return. She would leave their shack before dawn, walking 3 miles to the courthouse because they couldn't afford bus fare. She would arrive before anyone else, before the lawyers in their pressed suits, before the judges in their black robes, before the defendants in their fear and desperation. She would unlock the doors. She would turn on the lights. She would make the coffee that others would drink without thinking about who made it. She would sweep the floors that others would walk on without seeing her. She would empty the trash bins filled with discarded evidence, forgotten pleas, crumpled dreams. And she would do it all without complaint. Without bitterness. Without resentment. Every evening, she would come home late, her hands raw from chemicals, her back aching from bending and lifting, her feet swollen from standing all day. But still she would smile at Amara. Still she would ask about her daughter's day. Still she would sit on their one worn-out couch and listen as Amara talked about school, about her friends, about the books she was reading from the library. Grace would stroke her daughter's hair and say, "We may not have much, but we have each other. And that is everything." Amara believed her. Because Grace never lied. Not once. Not even when the truth hurt. Not even when a lie would have made life easier. Grace lived by truth the way others lived by air. It sustained her. It defined her. It was the one thing she owned that no one could take away. Or so she thought. Because the world doesn't always reward honesty. Sometimes, it punishes it. Sometimes, it crushes it. Sometimes, it takes the most honest person in the room and makes an example of them. To remind everyone else what happens when you choose truth over power. Grace had spent years cleaning that courthouse, moving silently through the halls of justice, watching as verdicts were handed down, lives were changed, futures were decided. She never spoke unless spoken to. She never asked questions. She knew her place in the hierarchy. She understood that people like her, poor people, brown people, people who cleaned other people's messes, were meant to be invisible. But she saw things. She heard things. Things that were never meant to leave those rooms. Conversations between lawyers plotting their strategies. Judges discussing cases before they were officially presented. Defendants whispering confessions to their attorneys. Witnesses rehearsing their testimonies. Grace heard it all. And she kept it all to herself. Because that was part of the job. Discretion. Silence. Invisibility. But one night, she saw something that would change everything. Something she couldn't unsee. Something she couldn't unhear. Something that would force her to choose between her safety and her conscience. Judge Edwin Hawthorne. A name that carried weight. For 30 years, his word had ended lives, freed others, and shaped destinies. He was known as a man of principle. Stern but fair. Unyielding but just. People respected him. Some feared him. But everyone believed in him. He had built his reputation on consistency, on the appearance of righteousness. His courtroom was a place where the law was supposed to be blind, where every person, regardless of wealth or status, was supposed to stand equal before justice. That was the story, anyway. That was the myth. The narrative that everyone bought into. The comfortable lie that allowed people to sleep at night, believing that the system worked, that justice was real, that truth mattered. Judge Hawthorne was the face of that lie. And he wore it well. He had silver hair that he kept perfectly styled. His robes were always immaculate. His voice was deep and authoritative, the kind of voice that commanded respect without needing to shout. When he spoke, people listened. When he made a ruling, people accepted it. Even when they disagreed. Even when it hurt them. Because Judge Hawthorne represented something bigger than himself. He represented the idea that someone, somewhere, was looking out for justice. That someone was holding the line between order and chaos. That someone cared about right and wrong. But behind closed doors, Judge Hawthorne was afraid. Afraid of losing relevance. Afraid of growing old. Afraid of being forgotten. Afraid of the younger judges who were rising through the ranks, hungry and ambitious. Afraid of retirement, of becoming just another old man with stories no one wanted to hear. And more than anything, afraid of the secrets buried under his rulings. Secrets that, if exposed, would destroy everything he had built. Everything he pretended to be. Grace knew one of them. It happened on a Tuesday night. She was cleaning the judge's chambers, as she did every week. The room smelled of leather and old paper, of wood polish and fading cologne. The bookshelves were lined with legal texts that no one read anymore, their spines uncracked, their pages yellowing. They were there for show. For the appearance of wisdom. For the photographs that would hang on walls and in newspaper articles. The desk was immaculate, every pen in place, every folder aligned with mathematical precision. Judge Hawthorne was a man who controlled his environment the way he controlled his courtroom. Nothing out of place. Nothing unexpected. Nothing beyond his command. But that night, one folder was left open. It sat on the corner of his desk, as if he had been reviewing it moments before and had been interrupted. Grace didn't mean to look. She wasn't nosy. She wasn't the type to invade privacy or snoop through other people's business. She was reaching for the trash bin when her eyes caught the name on the file, Marcus Bennett. She froze. Marcus Bennett. She knew that name. Everyone in town did. He had been sentenced to 25 years in prison for embezzlement. The case had been huge. Front page news for months. A local businessman accused of stealing millions from his own company, from the employees who trusted him, from the community that had supported him. The evidence was overwhelming. Or so everyone said. Bank records. Email trails. Witness testimonies. It all pointed to Bennett. He had denied it, of course. Insisted he was innocent. Claimed he was being framed. But who would believe him? The evidence was clear. The prosecutor was convincing. The jury was unanimous. And Judge Hawthorne himself had delivered the verdict, calling Bennett a disgrace to the community, a cancer that needed to be cut out. The sentence was harsh. 25 years. No parole. Bennett was led away in chains, still protesting his innocence, still crying, still begging someone, anyone, to believe him. But no one did. And the case was closed. Justice, everyone said, had been served. But the file Grace was looking at told a different story. There were documents inside. Bank statements that didn't match the official evidence. Emails that had never been presented in court. Signatures that proved the money had gone somewhere else entirely. All of it pointed to someone else. A man named Richard Colton, a wealthy developer with ties to the mayor's office, to the governor, to people who mattered. People with power. People with influence. People who could make problems disappear. The evidence showed that Colton had framed Bennett, systematically and deliberately. He had funneled the stolen money through offshore accounts, through shell companies, through a maze of financial transactions designed to hide the truth. And then he had left Bennett to take the fall. Set him up perfectly. Made him the scapegoat. Destroyed his life without a second thought. And at the bottom of one document, a handwritten note, bury this. Protect Colton. He's too valuable. The signature at the bottom. Judge Edwin Hawthorne's. Grace's hands trembled. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She looked around the room, suddenly aware of how alone she was, how vulnerable. The cameras in the courthouse didn't reach this office. No one knew she was here. No one would hear her if something happened. She knew what this meant. An innocent man was rotting in prison. A guilty man was free, living in his mansion, driving his luxury cars, attending charity galas where he pretended to care about justice. And the judge who was supposed to uphold the law, who was supposed to protect the innocent, who was supposed to be the last line of defense against corruption, he had destroyed justice with his own hands. He had signed away an innocent man's life to protect a criminal. For what? Money? Influence? Fear? Grace didn't know. And in that moment, she didn't care. She just knew it was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. She didn't take the file. She didn't photograph it. She didn't even touch it beyond what was necessary to see what was inside. She simply closed it, exactly as she had found it, finished her work with shaking hands, and left. But she couldn't sleep that night. She lay on the couch in their tiny shack, staring at the ceiling, listening to Amara's soft breathing from the mattress on the floor beside her. She prayed. She asked for guidance. She wrestled with impossible questions. What was she supposed to do? Who could she tell? Who would believe her? She was nobody. A cleaner. A woman with no power, no connections, no credibility. If she came forward, would anyone listen? Or would they just destroy her too? Would they call her a liar? Accuse her of fabricating evidence? Fire her and make sure she never worked again? Would they hurt Amara? Would they take her daughter away? Grace thought about Marcus Bennett. Somewhere in a prison cell, an innocent man was waking up to another day of captivity. Another day of knowing the truth and having no way to prove it. Another day of his life stolen from him. How many days had it been? How many years? How many more would he lose before he died in there, forgotten, dismissed, a cautionary tale about what happens when you cross the wrong people? She thought about Richard Colton. Waking up in silk sheets. Eating breakfast prepared by a chef. Planning his next business deal. Laughing with powerful friends. Living free while an innocent man paid for his crimes. She thought about Judge Hawthorne. Sleeping soundly. His reputation intact. His conscience apparently unburdened. How did men like that do it? How did they live with themselves? How did they look in the mirror and see anything but monsters? And she wondered if staying silent made her complicit. If knowing the truth and doing nothing was the same as participating in the lie. If protecting herself and her daughter meant abandoning Marcus Bennett to his fate. By morning, she had made her decision. She would tell someone. She would find a way to make it right. She didn't know how yet. She didn't have a plan. But she couldn't live with herself if she did nothing. Grace believed in truth. She had taught Amara that truth survives longer than power. And she had to prove it. Even if it cost her everything. Especially if it cost her everything. Because what was the point of having principles if you abandoned them the moment they became inconvenient? What was the point of teaching your daughter about integrity if you didn't live it yourself? Grace had always told Amara that your character is what you do when no one is watching. Well, someone was watching. God was watching. And more importantly, she was watching herself. She would have to live with whatever choice she made. And she chose truth. But she never got the chance. The next morning, before she could contact a lawyer, before she could find a reporter, before she could figure out how to bring this to light without destroying herself in the process, 2 officers showed up at her door. It was early. The sun was just rising. Amara was still asleep. Grace was making coffee, thinking about her next steps, when she heard the knock. Hard. Authoritative. The kind of knock that isn't asking permission. She opened the door. The officers didn't smile. They didn't explain. They just said, "Grace Williams, you're under arrest." She didn't understand. For what? She asked. Evidence tampering. Theft of confidential documents. Obstruction of justice. Her blood went cold. She tried to explain. "I didn't take anything. I didn't steal, save it for your lawyer," one of them said. They pulled her hands behind her back. She felt the cold metal of handcuffs close around her wrists. She heard Amara wake up, heard her daughter's voice, panicked and desperate. "Mom. Mom, what's happening?" Amara ran to the door. She was still in her nightgown, her hair tangled from sleep, her eyes wide with terror. She grabbed her mother's arm, trying to pull her back inside, trying to make this stop, trying to wake up from this nightmare. "Don't take her. Please," she didn't do anything. The officers pushed her gently but firmly aside. Grace looked at her daughter, her eyes calm despite the chaos, her voice steady despite the fear. "Remember what I taught you," she said. "Truth survives longer than power." And then she was gone. Led away in handcuffs. Placed in the back of a police car. Driven away while her daughter screamed her name. Amara stood in the doorway, barefoot on the cold ground, watching the car disappear down the road. She didn't cry. Not yet. She was too shocked. Too numb. Too unable to process what had just happened. Her mother was gone. Just like that. One moment she was there, making coffee, planning her day. The next moment she was in handcuffs, being taken away like a criminal. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. No trial. No lawyer. No chance to defend herself. Judge Hawthorne personally denied her appeal before it was even formally filed. He said the evidence against her was clear. He said she had violated the trust of the court. He said she was a threat to the integrity of the justice system. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. And Grace was sent to a women's correctional facility 2 hours away, where she would spend the next 10 years of her life. Unless something changed. Unless someone fought for her. Unless the truth came out. But who would fight? Who would listen? Grace was nobody. A cleaner accused of a crime by a respected judge. In the eyes of the law, in the eyes of the public, she was guilty. Case closed. Move on. Nothing to see here. Amara was placed temporarily with a neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson who had known Grace for years. Mrs. Patterson did her best. She fed Amara. She made sure she went to school. She asked if she was okay. But Amara wasn't okay. How could she be? Her world had been torn apart. Her mother was in prison. And everyone believed she deserved to be there. That night, Judge Hawthorne went home. He poured himself a drink. Scotch, expensive, smooth. He sat in his study, staring at the same file Grace had seen. He told himself he had done the right thing. He told himself Grace was a risk, a liability, a threat that had to be neutralized. He told himself she would have destroyed everything, his career, Colton's empire, the careful balance of power that kept the city running. He told himself the world was better this way. That sometimes justice required sacrifice. That the needs of the many outweighed the needs of the few. That Grace was collateral damage in a bigger game. He told himself a lot of things. And maybe, for a moment, he even believed them. But deep down, in a place he didn't like to visit, he knew the truth. He had destroyed an innocent woman to cover up his crime. He had sent her to prison to protect a criminal. He had betrayed everything he claimed to stand for. And there was no coming back from that. He finished his drink. He stood up. And then, without warning, his vision blurred. The room spun. His left arm went numb, heavy, useless. His chest tightened like a vice was closing around his heart. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't move. They felt distant, disconnected, like they belonged to someone else. He tried to call for help, but his voice came out as a whisper, weak and pathetic. He reached for his phone, but his fingers wouldn't cooperate. The device fell from his hand, clattering to the floor. He fell with it. His body hit the hardwood with a heavy thud. He lay there, conscious, aware, trapped inside a body that had suddenly become his enemy. He could see the ceiling. He could hear the clock ticking on the wall. He could feel the cold floor beneath him. But he couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Couldn't do anything but wait and hope that someone would find him before it was too late. By the time his housekeeper discovered him the next morning, precious hours had been lost. The paramedics arrived. They worked quickly, efficiently, loading him onto a stretcher, hooking him up to monitors, pumping him full of medications. They rushed him to the hospital. The doctors did what they could. But the damage was done. When Judge Edwin Hawthorne woke up in the hospital 3 days later, the doctors gave him the news. He had suffered a massive stroke. A catastrophic event that had ravaged the left side of his brain. His cognitive functions were intact. His memory was sharp. He could think. He could understand. He could process information. But his body was a prison. He was paralyzed from the neck down. Complete loss of motor function. No movement. No sensation. Nothing below his head responded to his commands. He could breathe on his own, barely. He could speak, though his voice was weak and slurred. But he couldn't move his arms. Couldn't move his legs. Couldn't feed himself. Couldn't use the bathroom. Couldn't do anything without assistance. He was completely, utterly dependent on others for every basic human function. The irony was cruel. And complete. Judge Edwin Hawthorne, who had spent 30 years exercising power over others, who had controlled lives with the stroke of a pen, who had commanded respect and obedience, was now helpless. He had imprisoned an innocent woman. And now he was imprisoned in his own body. He had taken away Grace's freedom. And now his freedom was gone. Some might call it karma. Some might call it divine justice. Some might call it coincidence. But those who knew the story, who understood what had happened, they called it what it was: consequences. For the first time in his life, Judge Edwin Hawthorne was facing real consequences for his actions. And there was no one to appeal to. No higher authority to manipulate. No powerful friends to bail him out. Just him. Alone with his guilt. Trapped in a body that wouldn't forgive him. Amara visited her mother every week. The bus ride took 2 hours. She would use the little money Mrs. Patterson gave her for the fare. She would sit in the back, watching the world pass by, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The landscape changed as the bus traveled. From the urban decay of their neighborhood to the industrial zones on the outskirts to the rural emptiness where they built prisons. Far from everything. Far from everyone. Out of sight. Out of mind. The prison was a squat, ugly building surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. It looked exactly like what it was, a place designed to hold people, to contain them, to remind them that they had lost their right to exist freely in the world. Amara hated it. She hated the smell, disinfectant and despair. She hated the sound, metal doors clanging, keys jangling, voices echoing. She hated the way the guards looked at her, with a mixture of pity and suspicion, as if her mother's guilt was somehow genetic, as if she was a criminal in training. But she came anyway. Every week. Without fail. Because her mother needed to see her. Needed to know she wasn't alone. Needed to remember why she had to keep going. The visiting room smelled like bleach and desperation. The tables were scarred and scratched, marked with the initials of countless inmates and visitors who had sat there before. The chairs were uncomfortable, designed to discourage long visits. Everything about the place was designed to break you down, to remind you that you had no power here, that the state owned you now. Grace would sit across from her, her hands folded on the table, her face calm. She wore the standard issue jumpsuit, orange and shapeless. Her hair, which she had always kept neat, was now pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked older. Tired. But her eyes were still clear. Still strong. She never cried. She never complained. She never talked about how hard it was, about the other inmates, about the food, about the guards, about the endless days that blurred together. She only focused on Amara. She would ask about school. About Mrs. Patterson. About whether Amara was eating enough, sleeping enough, taking care of herself. And she would say, always, do not beg them, my child. Truth does not kneel. But Amara could see the exhaustion in her mother's eyes. She could see the way her shoulders sagged, the way her voice had grown quieter, the way she held herself as if she was carrying a weight that was slowly crushing her. And it broke her heart. Because Grace had done nothing wrong. She had seen injustice and tried to stop it. She had chosen truth over safety. And for that, she had been punished. Amara wanted to scream. She wanted to storm into that courthouse and tell everyone what had really happened. She wanted to find Judge Hawthorne and demand answers. She wanted to expose Richard Colton. She wanted to free Marcus Bennett. She wanted justice. Real justice. Not the twisted, corrupted version that had destroyed her mother. But she was just a girl. 13 years old. Poor. Powerless. Who would listen? Who would care? What could she possibly do against a system that was designed to protect people like Hawthorne and Colton and crush people like her mother? Still, something strange began to happen. Every time Amara prayed for her mother, people around her felt lighter. It started small. Mrs. Patterson had been suffering from arthritis for years. Her hands were gnarled and painful, her knees swollen and stiff. She could barely walk some days. But one morning, after Amara had stayed up late praying, crying, begging God to help her mother, Mrs. Patterson woke up and her pain was gone. Completely gone. She came downstairs and found Amara in the kitchen. "Child," she said, her voice filled with wonder, "I don't know what happened, but I feel 20 years younger. My hands don't hurt. My knees don't ache. I can move like I used to." Amara didn't know what to say. She just smiled and said, "I'm glad, Mrs. Patterson." But inside, she wondered. Was it coincidence? Or was it something else? Then there was Mr. Chen, who lived next door. He had been bedridden for months after a car accident. The doctors said he would probably never walk again. His spine was damaged. His legs were useless. His family was preparing to move him to a long-term care facility. But one afternoon, Amara visited him, bringing him some soup that Mrs. Patterson had made. She sat with him for a while, talking, listening to his stories. He was lonely. His family worked long hours. He spent most of his days staring at the ceiling, trapped in his own body, wondering what the point of living was if this was all he had left. Before she left, Amara took his hand. She didn't say anything. She just closed her eyes for a moment, thinking about her mother, thinking about justice, thinking about healing. And when she opened her eyes and left, Mr. Chen felt something shift. A tingling in his legs. A warmth. A sensation he hadn't felt in months. By that evening, he could wiggle his toes. By the next morning, he was standing, shakily, holding on to the bed frame. By the end of the week, he was walking. His doctors were baffled. They called it a miracle. They had no explanation. Mr. Chen didn't need an explanation. He knew. There was more. A dying plant in their windowsill bloomed overnight, its petals bright and full of life when just the day before it had been brown and withered. A stray dog with a broken leg started running again after Amara touched its head, bending down to comfort it as it whimpered in pain. A woman at the grocery store who had been coughing for weeks, a deep, rattling cough that suggested something serious, stopped coughing after Amara helped her reach an item on the top shelf. At first, Amara thought it was coincidence. Just random events that happened to occur around her. But it kept happening. Over and over. And people started to notice. They started to talk. Mrs. Patterson would watch her with a mixture of awe and concern. "Child," she said one night, "there's something special about you. Your mother always said your family carried a gift. I didn't believe it until now." Amara didn't know what to say. She didn't feel special. She didn't feel gifted. She just felt desperate. Desperate to help her mother. Desperate to make things right. Desperate to believe that truth and justice weren't just pretty words but actual forces in the world. Grace had always said their family carried an old gift. Not magic. Not some supernatural power that defied the laws of nature. But deep alignment with truth. When you live in honesty, Grace once told her, when you live in truth, when you choose justice over convenience, the world responds. Healing follows justice. Restoration follows truth. Because the universe is built on truth. Lies are parasites. They corrupt. They destroy. But truth heals. Truth restores. Truth makes whole what was broken. Amara didn't fully understand it. It sounded mystical, almost religious, but Grace wasn't religious in the traditional sense. She didn't go to church. She didn't quote scripture. She didn't perform rituals. She just lived by a code. And that code seemed to have power. Real, tangible power. Power that Amara was now experiencing. And she began to wonder, if truth could heal, could it also set her mother free? Could it restore what had been broken? Could it bring justice to those who had escaped it? 6 months passed. Amara kept visiting. Grace kept waiting. And Judge Hawthorne remained in his wheelchair, a shadow of the man he once was. He made a few public appearances, wheeled into the courtroom for symbolic hearings, his presence meant to remind people that justice still stood. But everyone could see the truth. He was broken. Powerless. Pathetic. The man who had once commanded respect with a look now needed help to sit up straight. The man who had once spoken with authority now slurred his words. The man who had once controlled lives couldn't control his own bladder. It was a humiliating fall. And while some people felt pity, others felt satisfaction. Justice, they whispered. He's getting what he deserves. Though most people didn't know what he truly deserved. They didn't know about Grace. Didn't know about Marcus Bennett. Didn't know about the corruption hidden beneath his robes. They just saw a powerful man brought low by fate. And they called it karma without knowing how right they were. Judge Hawthorne himself was trapped in a hell of his own making. Every day was the same. Wake up. Be lifted from bed by nurses. Be washed like an infant. Be dressed. Be fed. Be wheeled from room to room. Sit through meetings where people spoke around him, past him, as if he wasn't fully there. And every night, lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying his choices. Thinking about Grace. About Marcus Bennett. About Richard Colton. About the file. About the moment he decided that protecting his career was more important than protecting the truth. And he would wonder, was this punishment? Was God real? Was there some cosmic force that balanced the scales? Or was it just biology? Just a blood clot in the wrong place at the wrong time? Just random chance that happened to look like justice? He didn't know. And that not knowing ate at him worse than the paralysis itself. One day, Amara heard that the judge would be in court again. A formality. A sentencing hearing for a minor case. Nothing significant. Just a display, really. A way to show the public that Judge Hawthorne was still technically on the bench, still technically serving, even if everyone knew he was finished. His career was over. His legacy was being written. And soon, very soon, he would be forced to retire. To disappear. To become a footnote. The great Judge Edwin Hawthorne, who ended his career in a wheelchair, unable to even hold a gavel. Amara heard about the hearing from a neighbor who worked in the courthouse. She made a decision. She would go. She would speak. She didn't know if anyone would listen. She didn't know if it would change anything. But she had to try. Because her mother had taught her, speak only when your words matter. And this mattered. This was the moment. If she stayed silent now, she would carry that silence forever. If she didn't fight for her mother, who would? So she would go. She would stand in that courtroom. And she would tell the truth. Let them laugh. Let them mock her. Let them dismiss her. She would say what needed to be said. And maybe, just maybe, something would change. The day of the hearing arrived. It was a Wednesday. The sky was gray, threatening rain. Amara woke up early. She didn't tell Mrs. Patterson where she was going. She just left a note saying she'd be back later. She walked the 3 miles to the courthouse. The same courthouse her mother had cleaned for years. The same building where justice was supposed to happen. She arrived just as the doors were opening. People were filing in, lawyers with their briefcases, defendants with their fear, families with their hope and desperation. Amara slipped in with them. No one stopped her. No one asked why she was there. She was just another face in the crowd. Just another person seeking something from the system. She found a seat in the back of the courtroom. The room was exactly as she'd imagined. High ceilings. Wood paneling. The seal of the state hanging behind the judge's bench. Rows of seats for spectators. A jury box, empty today. Tables for the prosecution and defense. Everything designed to intimidate. To remind you that this was serious. That the law was powerful. That you were small. The courtroom was crowded. Lawyers shuffled papers, their conversations low and professional. Reporters whispered to each other, bored, waiting for something interesting to happen. This was just another hearing. Just another case. Nothing special. Nothing worth the front page. The judge was wheeled in by an assistant. Judge Edwin Hawthorne. He looked smaller than Amara had imagined. Older. Grayer. His face was blank, his eyes distant, as if he was somewhere else entirely. Maybe he was. Maybe in his mind, he was still the man he used to be. Still powerful. Still respected. Still in control. But his body told a different story. His head lolled slightly to one side. His hands rested uselessly in his lap. Drool gathered at the corner of his mouth until his assistant dabbed it away with a tissue. It was sad, really. Pathetic. This was the man who had destroyed her mother. This broken shell of a human being. Amara felt a strange mixture of anger and pity. She hated him for what he'd done. But she also saw that he was already punished. Already broken. Already paying a price. But not the right price. Not yet. Because Grace was still in prison. Marcus Bennett was still locked away. Richard Colton was still free. The truth was still buried. And that had to change. Amara stood in the back, her heart pounding. She wore the same torn dress she always wore. It was clean, washed carefully by hand, but it was old and worn. The hem was frayed. One of the seams was splitting. She had outgrown it months ago, but there was no money for new clothes. Her feet were bare. She couldn't remember the last time she'd owned shoes that fit. Her hair was tied back with a frayed ribbon, the same ribbon her mother had given her years ago. It was one of the few things she had left of her old life, of the time before everything fell apart. No one noticed her. No one cared. She was invisible. Just like her mother had been. Just another poor kid in a system that didn't see poor kids as fully human. Until she stepped forward. Until she moved from the back of the room toward the front. Until she opened her mouth and spoke. "Your Honor," she said. Her voice was small at first, barely audible. But it carried. Something about the acoustics of the room, or maybe just the shock of a child speaking unbidden, made everyone stop. The conversation ceased. The rustling of papers paused. Heads turned. Who was this child? What was she doing? If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about justice and truth. The bailiff moved toward her, his hand raised to stop her, to escort her out, to maintain order. But the judge raised a hand. Or tried to. His fingers barely twitched. But everyone understood the gesture. "Let her speak," he said. His voice was weak, slurred, barely recognizable as the commanding voice that had once filled this room with authority. But it was still a command. And the bailiff stopped. Stepped back. Waited. The room fell completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. You could hear someone's breathing. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Everyone was watching Amara now. This barefoot girl in a torn dress. This child who had no business being here, no right to interrupt these proceedings. But she was here. And she was speaking. And something about her presence demanded attention. Maybe it was the look in her eyes. Clear. Direct. Unafraid. Or maybe it was just the audacity of it. The sheer impossibility of what she was doing. Whatever it was, everyone waited. Everyone listened. Amara took a breath. She looked directly at Judge Hawthorne. Not at the lawyers. Not at the crowd. Just at him. And then she said the words that would change everything. "Free my mother, and I will heal you." The courtroom erupted. Not with agreement. With laughter. With gasps. With disbelief. A reporter in the front row actually laughed out loud, a sharp bark of amusement that he tried to stifle but couldn't. A lawyer shook his head, smirking, muttering something to his colleague. The bailiff looked at the judge, waiting for permission to remove this clearly disturbed child. A woman in the gallery whispered, "Is this a joke?" Another voice said, "Someone get her out of here." Even the stenographer paused, her fingers hovering over the keys, unsure whether to record this absurdity. The laughter wasn't cruel exactly. It was the kind of laughter that comes from shock. From the impossibility of what had just been said. From the disconnect between reality and this child's claim. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was a courtroom. This was the real world. People didn't heal paralytics. 13-year-old girls didn't bargain with judges. This was nonsense. This was delusion. This was sad, really. This poor child, traumatized by her mother's imprisonment, grasping at anything, even the impossible, to make sense of her world. But Judge Hawthorne didn't laugh. He stared at Amara. And for the first time in months, he felt something other than numbness. He felt fear. Cold, gripping fear that started in his chest and spread through his body. Because when Amara spoke again, she said something only Grace could have known. Something that had never been made public. Something that existed only in that file, in his memory, and in the conscience he tried to bury. "Marcus Bennett is innocent," Amara said. Her voice was stronger now. Steadier. She wasn't asking. She wasn't pleading. She was stating a fact. "You know he is. You buried the evidence. You protected Richard Colton. You sent an innocent man to prison to save a guilty one. And my mother saw the file. That's why you locked her up. Not because she stole anything. Not because she tampered with evidence. But because she knew the truth. Because she saw what you did. Because she was the only witness to your crime." The room went cold. The laughter died in throats. Silence swallowed every sound. People exchanged glances, uncertain, confused. What was she talking about? Was this true? Could this be true? The reporters leaned forward, suddenly interested. This wasn't just another hearing anymore. This was a story. The lawyers stopped smirking. They were listening now. Really listening. Because this girl was making specific accusations. Naming names. Citing facts. This wasn't the rambling of a disturbed child. This was something else. The judge's hands began to tremble. His breathing quickened. His face went pale. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He tried to speak, to deny it, to call her a liar, to have her removed. But the words wouldn't come. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Nothing. Just silence. Just fear. Just the terrible realization that his secrets were no longer secret. Amara kept going. She had come this far. There was no turning back now. "The file is in your chambers," she said. "Third drawer on the left. The Bennett file. Inside are bank statements showing that Richard Colton embezzled the money. There are emails proving he framed Mr. Bennett. There are documents with your signature, your handwriting, telling someone to bury the evidence. To protect Colton. To let an innocent man go to prison." She paused. Looked around the room. At the lawyers. At the reporters. At the spectators. At all the people who were part of this system. Who believed in this system. Who trusted that justice was real. My mother cleaned your office for 7 years, Amara continued. She never stole anything. She never touched anything that wasn't garbage. But one night, she saw that file. She saw the truth. And you knew she saw it. So you had her arrested. You made up charges. You denied her appeal. You sent her to prison to keep her quiet. To protect yourself. To protect Richard Colton. You destroyed her life to hide your crime. The judge's voice finally came, weak and cracking. How do you know this? It wasn't a denial. It was a confession disguised as a question. Everyone heard it. Everyone understood what it meant. If he had been innocent, he would have denied it immediately. He would have called her a liar. He would have had her removed. But instead, he asked how she knew. Which meant it was true. Which meant everything she said was true. Amara's eyes were steady. She didn't flinch. She didn't waver. Because truth doesn't hide forever, she said. My mother told me. Before they took her. She told me everything. And I've been waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the moment when you would have to listen. When you would have no choice but to face what you've done. She took a step closer. You've been paralyzed for 6 months, she said. Doctors can't help you. Medicine can't help you. Nothing has worked. But I can help you. Because healing follows justice. And justice starts with the truth. Free my mother. Admit what you did. Release Marcus Bennett. And you will stand again. The courtroom was completely silent now. No one moved. No one breathed. This was impossible. This was insane. But something about the way she said it, the absolute certainty in her voice, made people wonder. Made them hesitate. Made them think, what if? What if this child was telling the truth? What if Judge Hawthorne really had done this? What if Grace really was innocent? What if Marcus Bennett had been rotting in prison for years for a crime he didn't commit? What if justice had been corrupted at the highest level? And what if this girl, this barefoot, poor, powerless girl, was the only one brave enough to say it out loud? One of the reporters was already typing on his phone. This was huge. This was front-page news. A judge accused of corruption. An innocent man in prison. A cleaner framed to keep her silent. And now this girl, making impossible claims, demanding justice. Whether it was true or not, this was a story. This was the kind of story that could bring down powerful people. That could shake the system. That could change everything. A lawyer stood up. He was young, ambitious, the kind of attorney who was always looking for his big break. Your Honor, he said, I think we should investigate these claims. If there's any truth to what this girl is saying, sit down, another lawyer snapped. He was older, well-dressed, clearly expensive. He worked for Richard Colton. He had been sitting in the back, observing, not directly involved in this hearing but present nonetheless. And now he was worried. This is a disruption, he said. This child has no standing. She's making wild accusations without evidence. This is slander. This is, then let's see the file, the younger lawyer interrupted. If she's wrong, prove it. Open the file. Show everyone that she's lying. That should be easy enough. The older lawyer's face went red. This is highly irregular. You can't just, why not, a voice called from the gallery. It was a woman, middle-aged, well-dressed. She was the wife of an attorney, someone who had attended hundreds of these hearings. If there's nothing to hide, show us. If this girl is making it up, prove it. But if she's telling the truth. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Judge Hawthorne sat in his wheelchair, his mind racing. He was trapped. If he refused to produce the file, everyone would assume Amara was telling the truth. If he produced the file, everyone would see the evidence. Either way, he was finished. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. His life as he knew it was done. He thought about denying it. About claiming the file didn't exist. About having Amara removed and dismissed as a disturbed child. But he looked at her. Really looked at her. And he saw grace. He saw the same clear eyes. The same unshakable integrity. The same quiet strength. And he realized that this girl wasn't going to back down. She wasn't going to be scared away. She wasn't going to be silenced. She was going to stand there until someone listened. Until someone acted. Until justice was done. And in that moment, Judge Edwin Hawthorne made a choice. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the knowledge that he couldn't win this. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the first honest choice he'd made in years. "Bring me the file," he whispered. The bailiff leaned closer. "Sir." "Bring me the file," Judge Hawthorne repeated, louder this time. "The Bennett file. From my chambers. Third drawer on the left. Bring it here." The courtroom erupted again. This time not with laughter. With shock. With disbelief. With the dawning realization that something massive was happening. The bailiff looked uncertain. "Your Honor, are you sure, now?" the judge said. And there was something in his voice, some remnant of his old authority, that made the bailiff move. He left the courtroom. The minutes stretched. No one spoke. No one left. Everyone waited. This was history happening. This was the moment everything changed. And they all wanted to be there to see it. 5 minutes later, the bailiff returned. He carried a manila folder. He approached the judge, handed it to him. But Judge Hawthorne couldn't take it. His hands didn't work. So the bailiff held it. Opened it. And began to read. The documents were all there. Bank statements showing Richard Colton's offshore accounts. Emails detailing the embezzlement scheme. Evidence that Marcus Bennett had been framed. And at the bottom, a handwritten note in Judge Hawthorne's distinctive script: "Bury this. Protect Colton. He's too valuable." The bailiff's hands shook as he read. When he finished, he looked at the judge. And the judge nodded. "Read it aloud," he said. "All of it. Let everyone hear." The bailiff did. His voice was steady at first, then grew stronger as he realized the magnitude of what he was reading. He read the bank statements. The emails. The note. Every piece of evidence that proved Marcus Bennett was innocent. That proved Richard Colton was guilty. That proved Judge Edwin Hawthorne had known all along. When he finished, the courtroom was silent. Then, slowly, the silence broke. A reporter stood up and walked out, already on his phone, calling his editor. Another followed. Then another. The lawyers sat frozen, processing what they'd just heard. The spectators whispered, shocked, horrified, angry. And Judge Hawthorne sat in his wheelchair, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. No one heard him at first. "I'm sorry," he said again, louder. "God forgive me, I'm sorry." The young lawyer who had spoken earlier stood up. "Your Honor, I'm filing an emergency motion to release Grace Williams immediately. And I'm filing a petition for a new trial for Marcus Bennett." The judge nodded. "Granted." Both of them. Immediately. He looked at Amara. "Your mother is innocent. She should never have been there. I will sign whatever documents are necessary to secure her immediate release. And Marcus Bennett will be freed. Today. Right now. I will personally ensure it." His voice broke. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I will do what's right. Finally. After all these years. I will do what I should have done from the beginning. He looked around the courtroom. And I resign. Effective immediately. I am not fit to serve. I have betrayed everything this courtroom stands for. I have destroyed lives. I have corrupted justice. And I will face the consequences of my actions. He paused. Richard Colton should be arrested. The evidence is there. I will testify against him. Against myself. I will cooperate fully with any investigation. I will tell the truth. All of it. No matter what it costs me. The courtroom was in chaos now. People were standing, talking, arguing, calling people, taking notes. This was the biggest story in years. A judge admitting to corruption. An innocent man about to be freed. A cleaner vindicated. A conspiracy exposed. And at the center of it all, a 13-year-old girl who had demanded justice and refused to back down until she got it. Amara stood quietly, watching it all unfold. She didn't celebrate. She didn't cheer. She just waited. Waited for them to do what they said they would do. Waited for her mother to be freed. Waited to see if justice was real or just another promise that would be broken. 2 hours later, the paperwork was filed. The orders were signed. Phone calls were made. And Grace Williams walked out of prison. She had been there for 6 months. 6 months of her life stolen from her. 6 months of pain and separation and injustice. But now it was over. She was free. Amara was waiting outside when her mother emerged. They saw each other across the parking lot. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just looked at each other. Making sure it was real. Making sure this wasn't a dream. Then Grace ran. She ran like she hadn't run in years, like her body remembered how to move freely, like she was shedding the weight of those 6 months with every step. And Amara ran too. They met in the middle. They held each other. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Words weren't enough for this moment. This reunion. This victory. This restoration. They just held each other and cried. Tears of relief. Tears of joy. Tears of grief for the time that had been stolen. Tears of gratitude that it was finally over. Around them, the world kept moving. Cars drove by. People came and went. Life continued. But for Grace and Amara, time stood still. They were together. They were free. And the truth had won. But Amara's promise wasn't complete. She had said she would heal the judge. And everyone was waiting to see if that was possible. If it was real. Or if it had just been words. A tactic to get his attention. A manipulation to force him to act. Grace and Amara went home first. Back to their one-room shack. Back to the place where everything had fallen apart and where, now, everything could begin to heal. Mrs. Patterson was waiting for them. She cried when she saw Grace. She hugged her. She thanked God. She made them dinner. And they sat together, the three of them, eating in silence, just grateful to be alive, to be together, to have survived. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. She lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what she had promised. Thinking about Judge Hawthorne. Thinking about whether healing was really possible. Whether justice really could restore what had been broken. Grace sensed her daughter's restlessness. She sat beside her, stroking her hair. "What's wrong, baby?" she asked. Amara didn't answer at first. Then she said, "I told him I would heal him. But I don't know if I can. I don't know how." Grace smiled. "You already did," she said. Amara looked at her, confused. "But he's still paralyzed. He can't move." "I didn't," Healing isn't always physical, Grace said. Sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones we can't see. That man has been paralyzed by guilt, by fear, by lies for years. Today, you helped him face the truth. You helped him admit what he'd done. You helped him start to make things right. That's healing. That's restoration. The rest, well, we'll see. But you kept your promise. You gave him a chance to be whole again. What he does with that chance is up to him. The next morning, Amara made a decision. She would go back to the courthouse. She would see the judge. She would finish what she had started. Grace didn't try to stop her. She just said, do what your heart tells you. But remember, you are not responsible for his healing. You are only responsible for your truth. The rest is between him and God. Amara walked the 3 miles to the courthouse. It was early. The sun was just rising. The building was quiet. She found her way to where they were keeping the judge. He was in a small office, surrounded by lawyers and officials. They were discussing his resignation. His testimony. The investigation into Richard Colton. The fallout from yesterday's revelation. When Amara walked in, everyone stopped talking. The judge saw her. And he started to cry. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry. I destroyed your mother's life. I destroyed Marcus Bennett's life. I destroyed so many lives. I don't deserve your help. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve anything but punishment. Amara walked toward him slowly. Everyone watched. Some of them thought she would yell at him. Some thought she would spit on him. Some thought she would turn and leave. But she did none of those things. She approached his wheelchair. She looked at him. Really looked at him. And she saw not a monster, but a broken man. A man who had made terrible choices. A man who had hurt people. A man who had corrupted everything he touched. But also a man who was, finally, facing the truth. A man who was, finally, trying to make things right. She placed her hand on his shoulder. The room was silent. No one breathed. No one moved. Amara didn't shout. She didn't perform some elaborate ritual. She didn't pray loudly or make grand gestures. She simply closed her eyes. And she said, quietly, just between them, truth restores what lies destroy. You've told the truth. Now let your body remember what it means to be free. And then she said, louder, so everyone could hear, stand. For a moment, nothing happened. Judge Hawthorne sat there, trembling, tears streaming down his face. Everyone waited. Some people looked skeptical. This was nonsense. This was impossible. Paralysis doesn't just go away because a child tells you to stand. The human body doesn't work that way. This was going to be embarrassing. This poor girl was about to be humiliated. But then, something shifted. Judge Hawthorne felt something. A tingling in his fingers. A warmth spreading through his arms. Sensation returning to places that had been numb for months. He tried to move his hand. And it moved. Just a twitch at first. Then more. His fingers curled. Uncurled. His wrist rotated. Everyone gasped. The judge looked at his hand in disbelief. Then he tried his other hand. It moved too. Then his arms. He lifted them. Slowly. Shakily. But they moved. They obeyed him. After 6 months of nothing, his body was responding. He looked at Amara. How? She just smiled. Try your legs. He did. He focused every ounce of his will on his legs. On his feet. On the muscles that had been silent for so long. And slowly, impossibly, they began to respond. His toes wiggled. His ankles flexed. His knees bent. The lawyers in the room were backing away, shocked, frightened, unable to process what they were seeing. This wasn't possible. This was medically impossible. But it was happening. Right in front of them. Judge Hawthorne gripped the arms of his wheelchair. He pushed. His arms had strength now. His body was waking up. He lifted himself. Slowly. Shakily. His legs trembled beneath him. But they held. They supported him. For the first time in 6 months, Judge Edwin Hawthorne stood. He stood there, trembling, crying, his legs shaking so badly it looked like he might fall at any moment. But he didn't fall. He stood. And everyone in that room witnessed it. Some of them would later try to explain it away. Say it was a misdiagnosis. Say the paralysis was psychosomatic. Say there was some medical explanation they just didn't understand yet. But the people who were there, who saw it happen, who watched a completely paralyzed man stand up after a child told him to, they knew better. They knew they had witnessed something that couldn't be explained. Something that defied logic. Something that looked an awful lot like a miracle. The judge stood there for a full minute. Then, exhausted, overwhelmed, he sat back down. Not because he couldn't stand. But because he needed to process what had just happened. He looked at Amara. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't deserve this. But thank you." Amara nodded. "You have a second chance," she said. "Use it wisely. Tell the truth. Make things right. Help the people you hurt. That's how you thank me. Not with words. With actions." And then she turned and walked out. Leaving the judge and the lawyers and the witnesses to figure out what had just happened. Leaving them to wrestle with the impossible. Leaving them to decide whether they believed in miracles or coincidences or something in between. The story spread like wildfire. By that afternoon, it was on every news channel. By that evening, it was trending on social media. By the next morning, it was international news. The judge who admitted to corruption and then stood up after being paralyzed for months. The poor girl who demanded justice and promised healing. The mother who was vindicated. The innocent man who was freed. It had everything. Drama. Injustice. Redemption. And something that looked an awful lot like divine intervention. People had opinions. Lots of opinions. Some said it was a miracle. Proof that God exists. Proof that justice is real. Proof that truth has power. Others said it was a hoax. That the judge was never really paralyzed. That it was all staged. That someone was making money off this story. Still others said it was psychosomatic. That the judge's paralysis was caused by guilt and stress, and when he finally confessed, his body released him from his self-imposed prison. Scientists wanted to study him. Religious leaders wanted to meet Amara. Reporters wanted interviews. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. But Grace and Amara wanted none of it. They went home. They closed their door. And they lived their quiet life. Judge Hawthorne resigned officially the following week. He didn't fight it. He didn't try to salvage his reputation. He testified against himself in a formal hearing. He admitted everything. The corruption. The bribes. The cover-up. The framing of Marcus Bennett. The false imprisonment of Grace Williams. All of it. He held nothing back. He named Richard Colton as the man he had protected. He provided evidence. He cooperated fully with investigators. And he accepted the consequences. He was disbarred. Stripped of his pension. Investigated for criminal charges. His name, once synonymous with justice, became synonymous with corruption. He lost everything. His career. His reputation. His legacy. But he gained something too. He gained the ability to sleep at night. For the first time in years, he wasn't haunted by what he'd done. Because he'd finally faced it. Finally admitted it. Finally tried to make it right. He spent the next year doing community service. Volunteering at legal aid clinics. Helping people who had been failed by the system. Using his knowledge of the law to serve those who couldn't afford lawyers. He never practiced law again. But he used his experience to help others. And slowly, painfully, he began to rebuild something resembling a life. Richard Colton was arrested 2 weeks after the revelation. The evidence was overwhelming. The bank statements. The emails. Judge Hawthorne's testimony. There was no way to escape it. He tried. He hired the best lawyers money could buy. He called in every favor he had. He tried to intimidate witnesses. He tried to bribe officials. But this time, the system worked. The case was assigned to a judge who couldn't be bought. The prosecutors were young and hungry and determined to make a name for themselves by taking down a powerful man. The jury was selected carefully, screened for any connections to Colton. And the trial was public. Transparent. Everything the Bennett trial should have been but wasn't. Colton was convicted on 17 counts of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. His assets were seized. His companies were dissolved. His empire crumbled. And the man who had once wielded so much power found himself in a 6-by-8-foot cell, wearing the same orange jumpsuit that Marcus Bennett had worn. The irony was not lost on anyone. Marcus Bennett was released on the same day Grace was freed. He walked out of prison after serving 6 years for a crime he didn't commit. 6 years of his life. Gone. Stolen. Destroyed. He was 42 when he was sentenced. He was 48 when he was released. 6 years. His wife had left him. His children barely knew him. His parents had died while he was inside. His business was gone. His reputation was destroyed. Everything he had built was in ruins. And no amount of apology could give it back. The state offered him compensation. Money for wrongful imprisonment. It was a lot of money. More money than most people would ever see. But it felt like an insult. Like they were trying to put a price tag on 6 years of hell. On 6 years of being called a criminal. On 6 years of missing his children's lives. On 6 years of his parents dying while he sat in a cage, unable to be with them. On 6 years of nightmares and violence and despair. No amount of money could fix that. But he took it. Because what else could he do? He used some of it to rebuild his life. He started a foundation to help people who had been wrongfully convicted. He became an advocate for criminal justice reform. He told his story to anyone who would listen. He turned his pain into purpose. It didn't erase what had happened to him. But it gave it meaning. And that was something. Grace and Amara's life changed, but not in the ways people expected. They didn't get rich. They didn't become famous. They didn't write a book or sell movie rights or go on talk show tours. They just lived. Grace got her job back at the courthouse. Not cleaning this time. She was offered a position in the records department. Better pay. Respect. A desk. A title. She took it. Not because she needed validation. But because she needed to work. Needed to provide for her daughter. Needed to be part of something bigger than herself. Amara went back to school. Her classmates treated her differently now. Some looked at her with awe. Some with suspicion. Some avoided her entirely, unsure what to make of the girl who had done the impossible. But Amara didn't care. She focused on her studies. She read. She learned. She dreamed about college, about becoming a lawyer, about fighting for people like her mother, like Marcus Bennett, like everyone who had been chewed up by a system that was supposed to protect them. She wanted to change things. To make sure what happened to her mother never happened to anyone else. And she believed she could. Because she had learned something important. She had learned that one voice, speaking truth, could change everything. People still came to see them sometimes. People who had heard the story. People who wanted to meet the girl who had healed a paralyzed judge. People who wanted miracles. Who wanted her to heal their sick relatives. Who wanted her to solve their problems. Grace always turned them away gently. "My daughter is not a healer," she would say. "She's just a girl who told the truth." The healing came from justice. From truth. If you want healing, pursue justice. Tell the truth. Make things right. That's where the power is. Not in my daughter. In the truth itself. Some people understood. Others left disappointed. But Grace didn't care. She was protecting Amara. Making sure her daughter could have a normal life. Making sure she wasn't turned into some kind of saint or prophet or circus act. Amara was just a girl. A brave girl. A truthful girl. But still just a girl. And she deserved to be treated as such. On the 1-year anniversary of the day Amara walked into that courtroom, there was a ceremony. The city wanted to honor what had happened. To acknowledge the corruption that had been exposed. To celebrate the truth that had prevailed. They invited Grace and Amara. They invited Marcus Bennett. They invited Judge Hawthorne. They invited everyone who had been part of the story. Marcus Bennett spoke. He talked about the 6 years he'd lost. About the pain. About the anger. But also about forgiveness. About how holding on to hatred would only hurt him more. About how he'd chosen to turn his pain into purpose. About how he was grateful to be free, even if he could never get back what was taken. Judge Hawthorne spoke. He was different now. Humbler. Quieter. He walked with a cane, still recovering fully from his paralysis, but he walked. He talked about his shame. About the choices he'd made. About the people he'd hurt. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He said he didn't deserve it. But he thanked Amara for giving him a second chance. For helping him find the courage to face the truth. For showing him that it's never too late to do the right thing. Then they asked Amara to speak. She didn't want to. She was shy. She didn't like being the center of attention. But Grace encouraged her. "Say what's in your heart," she whispered. "Just tell them what you believe." So Amara stood up. She walked to the microphone. And she looked at the crowd. Hundreds of people. Some she knew. Most she didn't. All of them waiting to hear what she had to say. She took a breath. And she spoke. "A year ago, I was just a girl who missed her mother. I didn't set out to change anything. I didn't think I had any power. I was poor. I was young. I was nobody. But I learned something important. I learned that truth has power. Real power. Power that doesn't come from money or position or connections. Power that comes from simply telling the truth, even when it's hard. Even when it's scary. Even when everyone tells you to be quiet." She paused. "My mother taught me that truth survives longer than power. And I've seen that it's true." Judge Hawthorne had all the power in the world. But his lies couldn't survive the truth. Richard Colton had all the money in the world. But his crimes couldn't survive the truth. The system tried to bury my mother. But justice couldn't survive without the truth. "I didn't heal Judge Hawthorne," Amara continued. "Not really. The truth healed him. Admitting what he'd done healed him. Making things right healed him. I was just the person brave enough, or maybe desperate enough, to demand it. To say out loud what everyone else was afraid to say. And that's my message to all of you. Don't wait for someone else to speak up. Don't wait for someone with more power or more money or more influence to fight for justice. You do it. Right now. In your own life. In your own community. Tell the truth. Demand justice. Stand up for what's right. Even if you're scared. Even if you're alone. Even if everyone laughs at you. Because truth matters. Justice matters. And one voice, speaking truth, can change the world. The crowd erupted in applause. People were crying. People were cheering. People were standing. And Amara just stood there, a little embarrassed, a little overwhelmed, but mostly just relieved it was over. She stepped away from the microphone and went back to her mother. Grace hugged her. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. And that was all Amara needed to hear. Life went on. Years passed. Amara graduated high school. She got a scholarship to college. She studied law, just as she'd planned. She worked hard. She graduated top of her class. She passed the bar exam. And she became a lawyer. But not the kind who worked for big corporations or wealthy clients. She worked for legal aid. She defended people who couldn't afford lawyers. She fought for people who had been failed by the system. She took on cases that no one else wanted. Cases that paid nothing. Cases that were long shots. Cases where the odds were stacked against her clients. And she won more than she lost. Because she believed in truth. In justice. In the power of one voice speaking up. Grace was there for every milestone. Every graduation. Every victory. Every moment of pride. She lived long enough to see her daughter become the woman she'd always known she could be. And when Grace finally passed away, peacefully, in her sleep, at the age of 72, Amara was there. Holding her hand. Thanking her for everything. For the lessons. For the love. For the example. Grace's last words were simple: "You've made me so proud. Keep telling the truth, baby. Keep fighting. Keep believing that justice is real. Because it is. You've proven that." And then she closed her eyes. And she was gone. Amara buried her mother in a small cemetery on the edge of town. The funeral was well attended. Marcus Bennett came. Judge Hawthorne came, now an old man himself, walking slowly but walking. Mrs. Patterson came, now in her 90s but still sharp and kind. And dozens of others came. People whose lives Grace had touched. People who had been inspired by her story. People who had learned from her example. And Amara stood at the grave, looking at the simple headstone that read, Grace Williams. Truth teller. Mother. Hero. And she felt at peace. Because her mother's legacy wasn't just in her. It was in everyone she'd touched. Everyone who had learned that truth matters. That justice matters. That one person, standing up, refusing to back down, can change the world. Years later, Amara was asked to give a speech at a law school. She was older now. More experienced. She had fought hundreds of cases. She had won important victories. She had become known as a fierce advocate for justice. The students wanted to hear her story. Wanted to know how she'd done it. Wanted to understand what drove her. She stood before them, these young, idealistic students who still believed the system could work, who still believed justice was possible, and she told them the truth. When I was 13 years old, she began, I walked into a courtroom and made a promise I had no idea how to keep. I promised to heal a paralyzed judge if he would free my mother. Everyone laughed at me. They thought I was delusional. They thought I was a desperate child making impossible claims. And maybe I was. But I also knew something they didn't. I knew that my mother was innocent. I knew that an innocent man was rotting in prison. I knew that the system I was taught to respect had been corrupted. And I knew that if I didn't speak up, no one would. She paused, looking at the young faces before her. Some of you have heard the story. Some of you know what happened next. The judge admitted his crimes. My mother was freed. Marcus Bennett was released. And yes, the judge stood up. He walked again. People called it a miracle. People said I had some special power. But I'm going to tell you the truth. The real truth. She leaned forward. I don't have any special power. I never did. What I had was conviction. What I had was the absolute certainty that truth matters. That justice matters. That right and wrong are real things, not just abstract concepts. And when you stand in that truth, when you refuse to back down, when you demand justice even when the world tells you to be quiet, something shifts. The universe responds. Not because of magic. Not because of some supernatural intervention. But because truth is powerful. Truth is the most powerful force in the world. It can bring down empires. It can free the imprisoned. It can heal the broken. Not always physically. Not always immediately. But always, eventually, if you hold on to it long enough. She walked to the edge of the stage. You're about to enter a profession that should be about truth and justice. But I'm not going to lie to you. You're going to face corruption. You're going to face powerful people who think they're above the law. You're going to face systems that are designed to protect the wealthy and crush the poor. You're going to face judges who take bribes, prosecutors who hide evidence, police who lie on the stand. You're going to face moments where doing the right thing will cost you. Where telling the truth will hurt your career. Where fighting for justice will make you enemies. And in those moments, you're going to have to decide who you are. What you stand for. Whether you believe that truth matters more than your comfort, more than your safety, more than your career. She looked at them seriously. Some of you won't make that choice. You'll compromise. You'll tell yourself it's necessary. You'll convince yourself that you can't change the system, so you might as well work within it. You'll take the well-paying job at the corporate firm. You'll defend people you know are guilty. You'll look the other way when you see injustice. And that's your right. That's your choice. But don't lie to yourself about what you're doing. Don't pretend you're serving justice when you're serving power. But some of you will make a different choice. Some of you will decide that truth matters. That justice matters. That the people who can't afford lawyers deserve representation just as much as the people who can. That the innocent deserve to be defended. That the guilty deserve to be held accountable, regardless of how much money or influence they have. And if you make that choice, I want you to know something. It won't be easy. You won't get rich. You won't be famous. You'll work long hours for little pay. You'll face powerful enemies. You'll lose cases that should have been won. You'll see injustice prevail more often than you'd like. But you'll also change lives. You'll free innocent people. You'll hold corrupt officials accountable. You'll give voice to the voiceless. You'll be part of something bigger than yourself. And when you're old and looking back on your life, you'll know that you stood for something. That you fought for something. That you mattered. The students were silent. Some were nodding. Some were taking notes. Some were crying. Amara smiled. My mother used to say that truth survives longer than power. I've spent my life proving that she was right. And I hope some of you will too. After the speech, students lined up to talk to her. To shake her hand. To ask questions. One young woman, barely 21, with earnest eyes and a determined expression, asked, "Do you ever regret it? Do you ever wish you just kept quiet? That you'd let your mother serve her time and kept your head down?" Amara thought about it for a moment. No, she said finally. Not for a second. Because keeping quiet would have meant living with the knowledge that I could have done something and didn't. It would have meant watching my mother suffer and knowing I had the power to stop it but chose not to. It would have meant living a lie. And I couldn't do that. My mother taught me to tell the truth, even when it costs you. Especially when it costs you. Because that's when it matters most. The young woman nodded. I want to be like you, she said. I want to fight for justice. Amara smiled. Then do it. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait until you're ready, because you'll never feel ready. Just start. Take the case no one else wants. Represent the client everyone else dismisses. Tell the truth when it's hard. And never, never back down. The world needs people like you. People who care more about justice than comfort. People who are willing to fight even when the odds are against them. The young woman thanked her and walked away. And Amara watched her go, hoping she would keep that fire. Hoping the system wouldn't crush it out of her. Hoping she would be part of the next generation that would continue the fight. Because the fight never ended. Corruption didn't disappear because one judge resigned. Injustice didn't stop because one innocent man was freed. The system was still broken. Still biased. Still designed to protect the powerful and punish the poor. But it could be changed. Person by person. Case by case. Truth by truth. That night, Amara went home to her small apartment. It wasn't much. She could afford better now, but she'd never seen the point. She didn't need luxury. She needed purpose. She made herself dinner. She sat on her couch. And she thought about her mother. About Grace. About the woman who had taught her everything that mattered. About the woman who had sacrificed everything for truth. And she felt grateful. Grateful for the lessons. Grateful for the example. Grateful for the foundation that had made her who she was. She thought about Judge Hawthorne too. He was still alive, now in his late 80s. He had spent the last 25 years trying to make amends. Volunteering. Helping. Serving. He would never fully erase what he'd done. The 6 years Marcus Bennett lost would never come back. The 6 months Grace spent in prison would never be undone. But Hawthorne had changed. He had faced his crimes. He had told the truth. He had spent the rest of his life trying to be better. And that counted for something. Not redemption, exactly. Some things are too big to be redeemed. But growth. Change. The acknowledgement that he had been wrong and the commitment to do better. That was something. Amara had seen him occasionally over the years. At events. At ceremonies. At moments when their paths crossed. They never became friends. How could they? He had destroyed her mother's life. But they had a mutual respect. A recognition that they had both been changed by what happened in that courtroom. That they were both trying, in their own ways, to make the world a little more just. Marcus Bennett had lived a good life after his release. He had remarried. He had reconnected with his children. He had built a successful foundation that had helped hundreds of wrongfully convicted people. He had turned his pain into purpose. He had died 3 years ago, at the age of 71. Amara had been at his funeral. She had watched as his children spoke about him. About his strength. About his forgiveness. About how he had refused to let bitterness consume him. About how he had chosen to build rather than destroy. And she had thought, this is what justice looks like. Not revenge. Not punishment. But restoration. Healing. The chance to rebuild what was broken. Richard Colton had died in prison. 10 years into his sentence. A heart attack. Quick and relatively painless. Much more mercy than he had shown Marcus Bennett. But that was okay. Justice didn't require that he suffer. It only required that he face consequences. That he be held accountable. That he lose the power he had abused. And he had. His empire was gone. His name was synonymous with corruption. His legacy was ruined. That was justice enough. As Amara sat there, reflecting on the past 30 years, she realized something important. The story that had started with a 13-year-old girl walking into a courtroom had never really ended. It had rippled out. Touched thousands of lives. Changed hundreds of people. Inspired a generation of lawyers and activists and ordinary people to believe that truth mattered. That justice was possible. That one voice, speaking up, could change everything. She had received thousands of letters over the years. From people who had heard her story. From people who had been inspired to speak up. From people who had fought injustice in their own communities. From people who had refused to stay silent. Each one a small victory. Each one proof that truth survives longer than power. She thought about all the people who had been freed because someone like her had stood up. All the corrupt officials who had been held accountable because someone refused to back down. All the systems that had been changed because people demanded better. And she felt proud. Not of herself, exactly. But of what truth could do. Of what justice could accomplish. Of what was possible when people cared more about what was right than what was easy. There was a knock at her door. Amara checked the time. It was late. Almost 10. Who would be visiting at this hour? She opened the door cautiously. A young man stood there. Maybe 25. He looked nervous. "Ms. Williams?" he asked. "Yes," Amara said. "Can I help you?" "I'm sorry to bother you so late," he said. "But I didn't know where else to go. My mother is in prison. She was framed. She's innocent. But no one will listen. Everyone says she's guilty. Everyone says there's nothing I can do. But I heard your story. I heard what you did for your mother. And I thought, maybe you could help me." Amara looked at him. She saw herself 30 years ago. Desperate. Determined. Refusing to give up. She should have been tired. She should have been done for the day. She should have sent him away, told him to make an appointment, told him to come back tomorrow. But she didn't. She opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. "Tell me everything." And as he began to tell his story, as she listened to another tale of injustice and corruption and an innocent person trapped by a broken system, Amara felt energized. This was why she did it. This was what mattered. Not the awards. Not the recognition. Not the speeches. But this. Sitting with a desperate son who refused to give up on his mother. Listening to his story. Believing him when no one else would. Fighting for him when no one else cared. This was justice. This was truth. This was what Grace had taught her. And this was what she would keep doing until the day she died. Because the work was never finished. There was always another innocent person who needed defending. Always another corrupt official who needed to be held accountable. Always another person who needed someone to believe them. To fight for them. To refuse to give up on them. The young man finished his story. Amara had taken notes. She had asked questions. She had seen the inconsistencies in his mother's case. The evidence that didn't add up. The witnesses who had lied. The prosecutor who had hidden exculpatory evidence. It was familiar. Too familiar. The same patterns. The same corruption. Just different names. "Can you help us?" the young man asked, his voice breaking. "Please. She's all I have. She's innocent. I know she is. But no one will listen to me. I'm nobody. I don't have money. I don't have connections. I don't have power. But you understand. You know what it's like. Will you help us? Amara looked at him. She thought about her mother. About Grace. About the woman who had taught her that truth mattered more than safety. That justice mattered more than comfort. That some things were worth fighting for, even when the cost was high. She thought about the 13-year-old girl who had walked into a courtroom and demanded the impossible. Who had refused to back down. Who had believed that truth could change the world. That girl had been right. Truth had changed the world. Had freed her mother. Had exposed corruption. Had healed brokenness. And that same truth was calling her now. Calling her to fight again. To stand up again. To refuse to stay silent again. She smiled at the young man. Yes, she said. I'll help you. Give me everything you have. Every document. Every witness statement. Every piece of evidence. I'll review it all. And if your mother is innocent, I'll prove it. I'll fight for her. I won't stop until she's free. The young man's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you so much. I don't know how to repay you. You don't need to repay me, Amara said. Just promise me one thing. When your mother is free, when this is over, remember what it felt like to fight for justice. Remember what it felt like to refuse to give up. And if you ever see someone else in this situation, help them. Pass it on. Keep the chain going. That's how we change the system. One person at a time. One case at a time. One truth at a time. The young man nodded. I promise. And Amara believed him. Because that's what hope looked like. Not naive optimism. Not blind faith. But the determination to keep fighting, even when the odds were against you. Even when the system was broken. Even when powerful people tried to stop you. That was hope. That was justice. That was truth. The young man left, promising to send her all the documents. Amara closed the door. She looked around her small apartment. At the walls covered with certificates and awards and photos. Photos of her with her mother. Photos of her with Marcus Bennett. Photos of her with clients she had freed. Photos of victories, large and small. Each one a reminder that truth mattered. That justice was possible. That one voice could change the world. She sat down at her desk. Opened her laptop. And began to work. Because the work was never finished. There was always another case. Always another injustice to fight. Always another person who needed someone to believe in them. And she would keep fighting. Keep speaking truth. Keep demanding justice. Until the day she couldn't anymore. Because that's what Grace had taught her. That's what she had learned in that courtroom 30 years ago. That's what she would carry with her for the rest of her life. So let me ask you. If you were in Amara's position, would you have spoken up? Would you have walked into that courtroom and demanded justice, even when everyone told you it was impossible? Would you have risked everything for the truth? Or would you have stayed quiet? Kept your head down? Accepted that some injustices are too big to fight? I want you to think about that. Because we all face moments like that in our lives. Maybe not as dramatic. Maybe not as public. But moments when we have to choose between truth and comfort. Between justice and safety. Between speaking up and staying silent. And what we choose in those moments defines who we are. Defines what we stand for. Defines what kind of world we're building. Amara chose truth. And that choice changed everything. Changed her mother's life. Changed Marcus Bennett's life. Changed Judge Hawthorne's life. Changed Richard Colton's life. Changed the lives of thousands of people who were inspired by her story. One 13-year-old girl. One moment of courage. One refusal to stay silent. That's all it took. And if she could do it, maybe you can too. Maybe we all can. Think about the injustices you see in your own life. In your own community. In your own country. What are you doing about them? Are you speaking up? Are you fighting back? Are you demanding better? Or are you staying silent? Telling yourself it's not your problem. Convincing yourself that you can't make a difference. Because that's what they want. The corrupt officials. The powerful criminals. The people who benefit from injustice. They want you to believe you're powerless. That nothing you do matters. That the system is too big to change. But it's a lie. You're not powerless. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. Your refusal to stay silent matters. And if enough people speak up, if enough people demand justice, if enough people refuse to accept corruption and abuse and injustice, the system will change. Not overnight. Not easily. But it will change. Because truth survives longer than power. Because justice is more powerful than corruption. Because light always, eventually, defeats darkness. But only if we keep fighting. Only if we keep speaking. Only if we refuse to give up. That's the real lesson of Amara's story. Not that miracles happen. Not that some people have special powers. But that ordinary people, doing ordinary things, telling simple truths, can change the world. Can free the imprisoned. Can hold the powerful accountable. Can heal what's broken. Can restore what's been destroyed. All it takes is courage. All it takes is conviction. All it takes is the willingness to stand up and say, this is wrong. And I refuse to stay silent about it. That's what Grace taught Amara. That's what Amara proved to the world. And that's what I'm hoping this story teaches you. Because we need more people like Amara. More people like Grace. More people who care more about truth than comfort. More people who are willing to fight for justice even when the cost is high. More people who refuse to accept that corruption and injustice and abuse are just the way things are. We need you. The world needs you. To speak up. To fight back. To demand better. To refuse to stay silent. Will you? Will you be the person who stands up when everyone else sits down? Will you be the voice that speaks truth when everyone else is silent? Will you be the one who demands justice when everyone else accepts injustice? I hope so. Because that's how we change the world. One person at a time. One voice at a time. One truth at a time. And who knows? Maybe your story will inspire someone else. Maybe your courage will give someone else courage. Maybe your truth will set someone else free. Just like Amara's truth set her mother free. Just like Grace's integrity inspired her daughter. Just like Marcus Bennett's perseverance gave hope to others. Just like Judge Hawthorne's confession showed that it's never too late to do the right thing. We're all connected. We're all part of the same story. The story of humanity's struggle for justice. For truth. For dignity. For the recognition that every person matters. That every life has value. That everyone deserves to be treated fairly. That the powerful should be held accountable. That the innocent should be protected. That truth should prevail over lies. That's the story we're all part of. And the question is, what role will you play? Will you be part of the problem or part of the solution? Will you perpetuate injustice or fight against it? Will you stay silent or speak up? The choice is yours. Just like it was Amara's. Just like it was Grace's. Just like it is for all of us, every single day. And if you're still watching at this point, if this story has touched you, if it's made you think, if it's inspired you even a little bit, then do something with that feeling. Don't just let it fade. Don't just move on to the next video. Take action. Look around your community. Find an injustice. Find something that's wrong. And do something about it. Speak up. Volunteer. Donate. Organize. Vote. Whatever it takes. But do something. Because that's how change happens. Not through inspiration alone. But through action. Through ordinary people deciding that enough is enough. That things need to change. That they're going to be part of making that change happen. That's what Amara did. That's what changed everything. Not her words alone. But her willingness to act on those words. To follow through. To keep fighting even when it was hard. Even when it seemed impossible. Even when everyone told her to give up. She didn't. And because she didn't, lives were changed. Justice was served. Truth prevailed. So here's my challenge to you. Find one injustice. Just one. And do something about it. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to change the world. Just do something. Help one person. Speak one truth. Fight one wrong. And then do it again. And again. And before you know it, you'll have made a difference. You'll have changed someone's life. You'll have been part of the solution. And maybe, just maybe, your story will inspire someone else. And their story will inspire someone else. And on, rippling out, touching lives, changing the world. One person at a time. One truth at a time. One act of courage at a time. That's how it works. That's how change happens. That's how justice prevails. Not through grand gestures. Not through powerful people deciding to be benevolent. But through ordinary people like you and me deciding that we're not going to stay silent anymore. That we're going to fight for what's right. That we're going to stand up for truth. That we're going to demand justice. Starting now. Starting today. Starting with whatever small thing we can do. Amara was just a girl when she started. 13 years old. Poor. Powerless. Nobody. But she changed the world anyway. Because she had something more powerful than money or connections or influence. She had truth. She had conviction. She had the absolute certainty that what she was fighting for mattered. And that was enough. That's always enough. Because truth doesn't need power to prevail. It just needs someone willing to speak it. Someone willing to stand behind it. Someone willing to fight for it. Will that someone be you? I hope so. The world needs more people like Amara. More people like Grace. More people who understand that truth survives longer than power. That justice is worth fighting for. That one voice, speaking up, refusing to back down, can change everything. Be that voice. Be that person. Be the one who makes a difference. Starting now. If this story has moved you, if it's challenged you, if it's made you think about justice and truth and courage in new ways, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what injustice in your community are you going to fight against? What truth are you going to speak? What stand are you going to take? Let's build a community of people who care about justice. Who believe that truth matters. Who are willing to fight for what's right. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Someone who's facing injustice. Someone who feels powerless. Someone who needs to be reminded that they have a voice. That their truth matters. That they can make a difference. And subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories like this. Stories that remind us of what's possible. Stories that inspire us to be better. Stories that challenge us to fight for justice. Because we're all in this together. We're all part of the same struggle. The struggle for a world where truth prevails. Where justice is real. Where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Where the powerful are held accountable. Where the innocent are protected. Where corruption is exposed. Where lies are defeated. That's the world Amara fought for. That's the world Grace believed in. That's the world we can build together. If we're willing to fight for it. If we're willing to speak up. If we're willing to refuse to stay silent. Are you willing? I hope so. Because the world is waiting. Justice is waiting. Truth is waiting. For someone like you to stand up and say, enough. Things need to change. And I'm going to be part of making that change happen. Starting now. Thank you for watching this story. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for caring about justice. About truth. About doing what's right. Now go out there and make a difference. Speak your truth. Fight your battles. Stand up for what's right. And remember, you're not alone. There are millions of people out there, just like you, who care about justice. Who believe in truth. Who are willing to fight for what's right. Together, we can change the world. One person at a time. One truth at a time. One act of courage at a time. Just like Amara did. Just like Grace did. Just like you can do. Starting today. Starting now. Go change the world. I believe in you.